2 weeks after I buried my wife, my daughter and son-in-law came into my living room and said, "Dad, this $2.5 million house isn't yours anymore. We need the cash for a penthouse." I sat frozen, staring at the urn of my wife still on the mantel. What they didn't know was that in a sealed wooden box she left me lay a truth that could burn their world to the ground. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I often find myself sitting alone, staring at the same walls that once echoed with laughter, and in those long, heavy silences, my mind drifts back to everything I gave up for my daughter. I remember the nights I worked double shifts at the mill, my hands raw from splinters, just to save enough to pay her tuition. 4 years at the university cost me nearly $60,000, money I never really had, money scraped from overtime, loans, and the little I made selling furniture I built in my garage. I could have opened that wood shop, my dream since I was 20, but instead I handed it all over for Dawn. Then came the car, a $25,000 Ford that I financed so she wouldn't have to take the bus to her new job. Every bill had my name on it, every dollar was my sweat, and yet she drove it like it was her birthright, never even asking how I managed to keep up the payments. And the wedding. How could I forget the wedding? $40,000 for a venue she insisted on because she wanted to look like a princess. I cut checks until my account bled dry. I canceled a fishing trip to Alaska I had saved for over 10 years because every spare dime went to her dream day. I told myself it was love, that it was worth it. Now those sacrifices feel like chains I willingly wrapped around my own neck, only to have her tighten them when I'm too old to fight back. And it wasn't just money. It was meals skipped, nights alone, friendships abandoned, because I had to work. I ate beans and rice for weeks at a time, telling coworkers I liked the simplicity, when really it was all I could afford after tuition payments. Helen, my wife, used to beg me to slow down, to take that trip we dreamed of. We wanted to drive across Route 66 in an old camper van. I said, next summer, then the next. But summers slipped by, and the van never came. Instead, we poured our lives into Dawn, convinced we were building a foundation she could stand on. The truth is, we built a tower she climbed, only to push us off when she reached the top. And now, when I hear her voice coldly telling me, I have no place in this house, it's not just betrayal. It's the sound of every skipped meal, every canceled dream, echoing back in mockery. This house? It isn't just walls and brick. It's worth $2.5 million on the market, yes, but its true value is heavier. It's where Helen and I raised Dawn, where we hung stockings by the fireplace every Christmas. I can still see Helen, flower on her cheek, baking cookies while Dawn danced in her pajamas. Those walls heard our arguments, our reconciliations, our prayers whispered at night. Every corner holds a piece of us. The oak banister still bears the scratches from Dawn's bicycle when she rode it inside the house one rainy afternoon. The kitchen table has a notch from the night Helen dropped a pan and laughed so hard she couldn't breathe. This place is not just a house. It is our history. And to watch them stride through, eyes on the dollar signs, calling it property, calling it investment, feels like someone desecrating a grave. Each photo frame on the wall that once warmed me now stabs me. That smiling girl in the graduation cap is the same woman who just told me to sign away my life. And Helen's wedding picture, once my treasure, now feels like a cruel reminder that even vows and sacrifices can be erased by greed. One evening, in a haze of sorrow, I found myself in the bedroom, sorting through Helen's dresser. Her scent still lingered faintly on the scarves, though it had been years since she passed. That's when I noticed the small wooden box tucked beneath the folded sweaters. It had a brass lock, one I hadn't seen in decades. My heart pounded as I fumbled for the key, and when the lid creaked open, I felt the world tilt. Inside were documents, investment accounts, property deeds, insurance policies, amounting to over $18 million. My Helen, the quiet saver, the planner, had left a fortune hidden from even me. But there was more. A letter, yellowed but steady in her handwriting. "Martin," it read, "if you're holding this, I am gone, and if Dawn and David turn against you, this is your shield. I never trusted him. Protect yourself, and know that love does not mean surrender." My knees buckled. I sat on the floor, clutching that letter, sobbing like a child. It was love, but it was also a warning. It was proof of her faith in me and her fear of what was to come. And suddenly, the betrayal I felt wasn't just from Dawn. It was doubled, because Helen had carried this burden silently, knowing our daughter might one day do exactly what she has done. At first, I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was caving in. I whispered into the dark, "Helen, why didn't you tell me? Why did you bear this alone?" It was a second loss, another death piled onto the first. I grieved not only for my wife, but for the innocence of the family we once believed in. But as the night stretched on, that grief began to harden into something else. Determination. Her words burned in my mind. Protect yourself. This was not just money, not just assets. It was her final gift, her weapon, placed in my trembling hands. And I knew then I was not powerless. I had the means to fight, and more importantly, the duty to do so. I stared at my phone. Dozens of unread messages from Dawn, half apologies, half demands. I had been replying with weakness before, begging for explanations, pleading for her to remember the love we shared. Not anymore. I deleted them all, one by one. Gone. My thumb hovered over the call button for Victoria, the family lawyer Helen once trusted. I didn't press it yet. Not tonight. But I placed the letter on the desk where the morning sun would fall upon it. It was a promise. I whispered to the photograph of Helen, "I won't let them win. Never." The words tasted different this time. Steel instead of salt. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Helen's knitting basket still sat beside her chair, untouched since the week she passed. The rocking chair creaked when the wind hit the porch, but there was no one to rock it. I sat in my recliner, once my throne, now a prison. The clock on the wall ticked with cruel precision, each second a reminder that time was slipping, dragging me toward a confrontation I could no longer avoid. Once this living room had been a sanctuary. Now it was a cage, its walls pressing in, holding my grief and rage like a pressure cooker. I realized then that this silence was not peace. It was the drumbeat of war. The battlefield was not out there. It was here, in my home, in the very place they thought they could steal from me without consequence. And yet, even in that suffocating stillness, there was clarity. I saw the outlines of a plan, faint but growing. I remembered Victoria's card in my wallet. I thought of the safe deposit box at the bank. I thought of every smug word David had ever spoken, every insult disguised as advice. I saw their weakness. They were careless, greedy, and impatient. And I had patience on my side. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of power return. Not joy, not yet, but power. Enough to rise, to face what was coming. Enough to believe that Helen's last gift wasn't just paper. It was the key to reclaiming my dignity. So I made a choice, a small one, but symbolic. I shut off my phone. No more midnight begging, no more desperate replies. For the first time in years, I put myself first. I turned off the lamp, let the darkness fill the room, and felt strangely steady. Tomorrow would bring action. Tonight, I allowed myself silence. Not the silence of defeat, but the silence before a storm. And in that stillness, I knew this was not the end. It was the beginning. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 1 below to let me know you're here with me. I woke up the next morning with a strange calmness in my chest, the kind that only comes when pain has burned itself into something harder. The letter from Helen still lay on the desk, the morning light cutting across her handwriting. I touched it gently, almost like it was her hand resting there, steadying mine. Last night I whispered a promise. This morning I meant to keep it. My fingers no longer trembled when I picked up the phone. They were firm, steady. I dialed Victoria's number, the lawyer Helen had trusted years ago when we updated the will. My voice, once ragged from sleepless nights, came out clear. "Victoria, I need to meet. Today." She must have heard something in my tone because she didn't hesitate. She said, "Come at 2. Bring everything you've got." When I hung up, I stared at the folder spread across the desk. The deeds, the account statements, Helen's secret investments worth $18 million. For weeks I thought I was powerless, but this paper, this ink, it shifted the balance. I slipped it all into a briefcase and looked around the house once more. It no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like a fortress, and I was preparing for battle. At the bank, the air was cool, the marble floor echoing every step I took. I approached the counter, my briefcase heavy at my side. The young teller looked up, polite but curious. "How can I help you today, sir?" I handed her my ID and said with a steadiness that surprised even me, "I want to freeze every account under my name, immediately." She blinked, startled, then nodded and began typing. Her eyes softened when she glanced back at me. "Are you doing all right, sir?" That small kindness, that question from a stranger almost broke me, because my own daughter never asked it. She only asked how much money was left. I swallowed hard and nodded. "I'm better than I've been in months." As I signed the documents, I noticed my hand. Just weeks ago, it shook uncontrollably when I tried to write a grocery list. Now it was firm, pressing ink into paper with certainty. The teller smiled faintly as she slid the forms back. "There, everything is frozen. No one can touch a cent without your approval." The weight that lifted from my shoulders was enormous. For the first time, I felt control seeping back into me. I left the bank taller, straighter, the sun sharper on my face. Later that afternoon, I sat in Victoria's office. Her walls were lined with books, thick volumes of law and precedent, but it was her sharp eyes that mattered more. She studied me across the desk. "Martin, you look different, stronger." I slid the briefcase forward and opened it. She flipped through the pages, her eyebrows rising with every turn. 18 million! My God, Helen was meticulous. She paused, her gaze hardening. "Does Dawn know about this?" I shook my head. "No, she thinks the house and my savings are all I've got." Victoria leaned back, a half smile on her lips. "Then we have the advantage. We'll protect this, Martin, and if she pushes harder, we'll push back harder." Her words lit a fire in me. We went through the strategy, updating the trust, shifting the deeds into a personal protection plan, locking the assets where greedy hands couldn't reach them. Each form I signed made me feel stronger, like bricks laid into a wall I was building around myself. I thought of Dawn's cold words, the way David sneered, calling me obsolete. Each signature was an answer to them. A quiet, deliberate no. A few days later, David arrived at the house, swaggering in with a real estate agent at his side. He didn't even knock. He walked through the front door as if he already owned the place. The agent, a slick man in a sharp suit, carried a folder of glossy brochures. David gestured broadly, saying, "We'll list it for at least $2.5 million. The market is hot. This old place won't sit long." I sat in my chair by the fireplace, Helen's photo watching from the mantel, and I said nothing. I wanted to hear them. I wanted to let them reveal themselves. The agent walked around, pointing at furniture, shaking his head. "We'll need to clear this out. All this junk just drags down the value. My chest tightened. That junk was Helen's sewing table, the quilt she never finished, the clock we bought on our 25th anniversary. David laughed loud and cruel. Yeah, all this old crap. We'll rent a dumpster and get rid of it in a day. I clenched my fists under the armrests. My blood boiled so hot I thought I'd explode. But I stayed still, silent. Every insult was a record etched into my memory. Every word they spoke was ammunition for the war I was preparing. The agent turned to me at one point and asked, "Are you fine moving into assisted living, sir? It'll be easier for everyone." David grinned, satisfied. I lifted my eyes and met his, calm but burning inside. "I'm not going anywhere." The agent blinked, unsettled. David smirked. "We'll see about that." That night I sat with Victoria again. She had dug deeper, tracing David's background. She laid down a file in front of me, thicker than I expected. "You should know," she said quietly. "David has a problem, gambling. He owes nearly $300,000 to private lenders. Some of them aren't the type to forgive." I stared at the numbers, the loan agreements, the casino markers. My heart pounded, but not with fear, with power. I whispered almost to myself, "They think I'm finished, but the game is only beginning." The more I looked at that file, the more the strategy sharpened in my mind. David wasn't strong. He wasn't secure. He was drowning, hiding it under arrogance. If he lost access to me, to this house, to my accounts, he'd collapse. And Dawn, she had hitched her wagon to a sinking man. I almost pitied her. Almost. The next confrontation came in the kitchen. Dawn showed up alone, her voice soft, her eyes watery. "Dad, why are you making this so hard? You don't need this big house. You'd be happier somewhere smaller with people to take care of you." For a moment, the daughter I raised flickered before me. But then I remembered her silence as David mocked Helen's things, the way she nodded when he spoke of selling the house. I folded my arms. "This house is not for sale." Her lips tightened. She tried another tactic. She pulled out an old letter Helen had written years ago about downsizing after retirement. "See? Mom wanted this too." She waved it like proof. I took it, read it, and handed it back. "That letter was about us, about growing old together, not about you two cashing in." Her face reddened. She muttered something about being ungrateful, then stormed out. I didn't follow. I didn't beg. I simply sat at the table, and for the first time I felt taller than her. The shift inside me was complete. Once I was weak, pleading for love. Now I was steady, calculating. Every word they spoke revealed desperation. Every move they made pushed them closer to a cliff they couldn't see. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't shouting. I was waiting with Helen's letter and Victoria's file, like weapons sharpened for the final strike. That evening I looked in the mirror. My reflection was lined, tired, aged, but my eyes had changed. They were clear. Focused, the tremor in my hands was gone. My voice, when I whispered aloud, carried conviction. They thought I was broken. They thought I'd give up. But this isn't the end. This is the fight of my life. I don't know if anyone listening can feel this, but I want you to pause for a second. Think about the moments you've seen disrespect, betrayal, or greed tear families apart. If you know what that feels like, I want you to type one word in the comments. Respect. Because respect is the line that separates love from exploitation. Without it, there is nothing. And as I closed the file on David's debts that night, I knew exactly what my next step would be. They didn't know I had the power to ruin them. They didn't know Helen had armed me with the truth. They didn't know the storm was already at their door. This was just the beginning. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment to Stu below. to let me know you're here with me. I set the chairs the way Helen would have, spaced wide so no one felt trapped, yet close enough that no one could pretend they didn't hear the truth. I opened the windows to let in the late afternoon air. The curtains moved like the slow breath of the house. The mantel held Helen's photo, and the urn polished until it caught the light. I wanted every pair of eyes to see her face when the talking started. The table was cleared of clutter, just a pitcher of water, some glasses, and a stack of files in a neat square. I had already called Victoria that morning. The documents were in order. The accounts were frozen. The trust was sealed. The plan we built in Chapter 3 wasn't a plan anymore. It was a fuse, and tonight I would light it. They arrived together as if they were about to tour a model home. Dawn walked in first, coat folded over her arm, jaw tight, that delicate look she used when she wanted to appear reasonable. David followed with a smile that looked pasted on, a smile with corners sharp enough to cut. He carried a slim folder under his arm. It was glossy and heavy with promise. I had seen enough folders like that in my life to know they are mostly air. Behind them, Mrs. Gray from next door slipped in quietly, invited at my request. She has watched me mow these same lines into the lawn for 30 years and brought soup the week Helen died. A minute later, Hank arrived, my old bowling partner, hat in hand, his broad shoulders filling the doorway. Both had agreed to come because I asked, and because they have seen me on good days and bad, calm and foggy, patient and on edge. They were not there to fight for me. They were there to tell the truth of what they've seen. David's eyes swept the room, pausing on the files, then on Helen's photograph. He gave a little nod like he was humoring a child. He sat, crossed one ankle over a knee, and placed his folder on his lap. Dawn sat smaller than usual, spine stiff, eyes fixed on the documents as if they might leap up and bite her. I took my place in the armchair by the fireplace. The springs creaked, familiar and solid. I felt my feet on the floor. I felt the weight of the house around me, not as a burden, but as a body that had decided to stand. "Thank you for coming," I said. My voice was steady, the words simple. "We have things to settle." David smiled wider. "Good. Let's be efficient, Martin. We brought what you need to sign, title transfer, power of attorney for medical decisions. It's safer for everyone if we centralize. We'll get you into a place that can take proper care of you." He said proper care the way people say, proper burial. He slid the papers toward me across the coffee table, the edges whispering against the wood. Dawn cleared her throat and unfolded a brochure. A penthouse with big windows looked out over a city I didn't live in. The ink shone. The rooms had no dust. The kitchen had no scratches. She placed the brochure next to the legal papers, then folded her hands like she was praying. "Dad," she said, and her voice was honey, over ice. "This is the right move. As we can list this house at $2.5 million, it will go fast. The market is perfect. We can use the cash to put you somewhere safe and to invest in something that appreciates. David has it all modeled out." Before I could speak, Mrs. Gray stepped forward. She looked at Dawn, then at me. "I've lived next door since you brought that baby home in a blue blanket," she said. "I've seen you out at 6 in the morning shoveling snow. I've seen you check the roof after a storm and fix the porch yourself. I bring this up because there's nothing wrong with your mind, Martin. You remember when I had shingles. You brought me soup and set my pillbox right. You knew the schedule better than I did. Last week you reminded me that my trash day had changed. That's not a man who can't keep his own keys." Hank nodded and moved his hat from one hand to the other. "He's sharp," he said. "He beat me at cribbage twice last month, and that ain't luck." He remembered the score from the last frame the day after, too. People forget lots of things when they're tired or hurting. That ain't the same as being unfit. He's got his marbles, all of them, and he knows what's what. I let their words hang in the room. The house seemed to breathe again. Dawn's eyes flickered. David's smile thinned. "Thank you," I said to my neighbors. "That means more than you know." I turned to Dawn and David. "You say you have a plan for me. I have a plan for me, too. Before we get to that, we need to clear a few lies off the table." David chuckled, which is what people do when they think a joke will make you sit down. "This is unnecessary, Martin. We're trying to help." "Help?" I repeated, tasting the word. "Let's start with small things. Tuition. Who paid it?" Dawn blinked. "You did, but who signed the loan papers when there wasn't enough?" I asked. "Who took extra shifts and refinanced the truck?" "You did," she said softly. "The car you drove to your first job at the firm. Who bought it? $25,000. 5-year note. My name on the line." "You did," she said again, even softer. "The wedding. $40,000 for a venue you remember only as a backdrop for photos you don't look at. Who wrote those checks?" "You did," she whispered. I nodded, not for pride, for the record. "And the house," I said, turning to David. "Who repaired the roof when it leaked rather than call a company that would charge double? Who cared for these floors with oil in hands? Who polished that picture frame every week?" David glanced at the frame, then away. "We're not disputing the past, Martin," he said. "We're talking about the future. This house is an asset sitting idle. We can put it to work." I slid the first file from the stack. I did not push it toward him. I placed it in front of me, where I could see it, and where everyone else could, too. "The accounts have been frozen," I said. "Every account with my name on it. The bank knows me. They know my signature. They know my mind. Nothing moves without me. The titles have been shifted into a personal protection trust. The deeds are recorded. I have no intention of selling my home. It is not idle. It is occupied. By me and by history." David's laugh fractured. "You can't do that without—" "I did," I said. "Yesterday, with counsel, with witnesses, with notaries who spelled my name and watched my hand. If you intend to file anything to contest it, you'll find the filings predate whatever you place in front of me tonight." He opened his mouth and then closed it. The file on his lap looked smaller. Dawn picked up the brochure with the penthouse and set it down again as if the paper was hot. I opened the second file. I did not rush. I did not raise my voice. "Dawn, do you remember the letter you produced last week? The one where your mother mentioned downsizing someday?" She nodded. She did not look at me. "We found it together when we were going through her things." "That letter was about dreams," I said. "It was about two people who thought they had all the time in the world. It was not an invitation to cut me out of my life. You waved it in my face like proof that Helen wanted this." I placed my palm on Helen's picture. Helen did not want this. She wanted me to be cared for with love and respect. She wanted honesty. She wanted gentleness. She wanted our daughter to remember who raised her. David shifted in his seat. "Martin, you're being dramatic." I took a small recorder from the third file and pressed a button. David's voice filled the room, tinny but clear. "If you don't get him out," his recorded voice said, flat and cold, "I'm done. I won't stay married to you if your father keeps draining our chances. You make it happen, or I walk." The room froze. The words lay in the air like broken glass. Dawn's face drained of color. David lunged for the device, then stopped himself, forced a smile that cracked at the edges. "That's taken out of context," he said. "We were arguing. People say things." "Context," I said, "is your habit of visiting this house like a landlord. Context is bringing realtors without asking. Context is calling my wife's sewing table junk. Context is pulling a dumpster into our driveway while her photo watched." I let the recorder play the remaining seconds. There was a long pause on the file where Dawn whispered, "I can't do this to him." And David replied, "Then you're not the woman I married." I switched it off. No one spoke. Dawn looked at her hands. They were shaking. She folded them tighter until the knuckles whitened. "Dad," she said. "Not yet," I said. "We're still sweeping the table." David decided to attack. He reached into his folder and flung down a printed spreadsheet, cells highlighted in pale green and red. "Here are the numbers," he said. "Your expenses, your medical, your utilities, your food, all of it. This is not sustainable. You're sitting on capital that should be leveraged. This is math, not malice." He meant to drown me in columns. Numbers have a smell when they're used like that. Acrid. I leaned forward and looked at the sheet. Then I placed it gently aside, like a placemat. "Math requires all inputs," I said. "Let me show you what you missed." I opened the fourth file. Property records, deeds, statements. I placed them in a neat line like a slow drumbeat. "This house is mine," I said. "The building you live in is mine. The account your rent goes to is mine. The stocks in the company you work for, David, are partly mine. The trust that protects these assets is mine. And this, a letter from Helen, you do not get to see, but you will feel." I kept my hand on that envelope the way a man keeps a hand on a holstered weapon. Calm. "Sure." David laughed again, but the sound tilted high. "You expect me to believe—" "You don't have to believe, Art," I said. "You only have to read." I pushed one deed across the table at last, not as a gift, but as a sentence. He read the address, blinked, read the owner's name, blinked again. His mouth opened, then closed. His tongue wet his lips like someone who had eaten something too salty. Dawn leaned in. Her breath caught. "The building," she whispered. "Our building." I nodded. "Our building," I said. "Mine and Helen's. We bought it years ago. Quietly, we kept it safe. We used the rent to build a life that would outlast the worst day. You have been living under my roof, even when you were not beneath these shingles. Remember that next time you measure where to put a dumpster." Hank let out a low whistle. He tried to swallow. Mrs. Gray pressed her hands together and let out a breath she had been holding since the recorder spoke. The room felt different now, heavier, but cleaner. David tried a new angle, which is what men do when their first story breaks. "If that's true," he said, and his voice sharpened, "then you've been hiding assets to avoid tax, to avoid family law, to—" "That will not work," I said. "Everything is above board. Everything is filed, audited, stamped. You are welcome to hire counsel and go fishing. Bring a long line. You will need it." He glared at me then, the friendly mask ripped from his face. The anger underneath was the only honest thing I had seen from him in months. He turned on Dawn. "You told me he had nothing. You said this house and a meager pension. You said—" She flinched. "You said you had it under control," she snapped, eyes flashing for the first time tonight. "You said all I had to do was convince him to move, and everything would be fine." They were already cracking. That sound is soft at first, like ice in a river that looks solid until your foot finds the weak spot. I watched them argue in low voices, words tight, teeth clenched, then raised my hand. They turned back toward me, like children caught whispering in church. "Before we go further," I said, "we're going to hear from someone else." I gestured to Victoria, who had waited in the hallway until I called her name. She stepped in, a folder of her own balanced on her palm, her face not unkind, but very firm. She greeted everyone, then sat on the arm of the sofa, not too close to anyone, like a judge who decided to sit among the people rather than above them. "Martin has authorized me to speak," she said. "I won't belabor this. The accounts totaling $400,000 in liquid savings have been frozen by written instruction from my client. The property titles have been re-recorded into a revocable trust with protective provisions. The building at this address," she named the one Dawn and David lived in, "is owned outright by the trust. Any attempt to transfer or encumber these assets without my client's consent will be treated as fraud. Additionally, she paused and opened a different section of her file. We have reviewed public records. Mr. Foster, your debts total roughly $300,000 across casino markers, private promissory notes, and one high-interest line of credit. We also have an affidavit from a lender describing a default. Given this, any pressure you have been placing on this family has an obvious financial motive. I advise you to sit quietly for the next part. His face went the color of old paper. Dawn turned fully toward him now, chest heaving, betrayal blooming in her eyes. 300,000, she said, not screaming, not whispering, just stunned. You told me we were fine. He tried the laugh again, but it came out stuck. This is temporary, he sputtered. A rough patch. It's all calculated. That's why we needed to move fast. It's just leverage. It's lying, she said, to me, about everything. He pointed at me, jabbed the air like he could puncture it. He set this up, he said. He's turning you against me. I didn't make you gamble, I said. I didn't make you threaten my daughter on tape. I didn't bring a realtor into my living room and call my wife's things junk. I didn't plot to push an old man out of his house so you could buy a penthouse for $1.2 million with someone else's history. I didn't do any of that. You did. Silence again. Silence that was not empty, but full as thunder. He lunged for the penthouse brochure and held it up like a shield. This was for our future, he said to Dawn. For our child. For stability. For you, she said. The paper trembled. All of this was for you? I let the sentence land. Then I reached for the last envelope, the one with Helen's handwriting, the one I had not shown anyone, not even Victoria, because some things need to come directly from the dead to the living without a translator. I ran my thumb under the flap and slid out a single page. The ink was a little faded, but her script was unmistakable. I did not hand it to them. I read it. Martin, I read, and my voice softened and then steadied again. If our daughter and her husband ever come for the house, for your dignity or for your years, use what I left you. I have put the building and the accounts where they cannot reach without you. I have written conditions for Dawn. She inherits only if she has cared for you with love and respect. If she has not, I ask you to give her time to return to herself, but not to give her power over you. I never trusted David. He hides his hunger behind numbers. If he is still around when you read this, protect yourself and teach. The lesson is love with boundaries, not surrender. I folded the letter. My hands did not shake. I looked at Dawn. There were tears on her face now, but not the kind used to wash away guilt, real ones. I saw the little girl who used to fall asleep on the rug with crayons in her fist. I saw the teenager who slammed doors and then slipped apologies under them. I saw the bride. I walked down a church aisle, my heart swelling. And I saw the woman who had let herself be pulled into another person's gravity, far from the better part of herself. She met my eyes and then looked away, ashamed. David slammed his palm on the table. The glasses jumped. "This is manipulation," he shouted. "This is emotional blackmail. You're a bitter old man twisting a dead woman's words." I leaned back and let my breath out slowly. "No," I said, "this is clarity. This is the truth coming home." I nodded to Victoria. She slid one last document onto the table. It was short. It had a notary seal. It had my signature. It had the date. "This," Victoria said, "is an eviction notice served under the lawful rights of the property owner for the unit currently occupied by Mr. and Mrs. Foster. 30 days to vacate. Failure to do so will result in court action. This is not a threat. It is a process." Dawn gasped. David's face split, rage and panic fighting for the top. He looked at the paper, then at me, then at the hall, as if the door had moved. He reached for words and found only noise. "You can't. You wouldn't. You don't." "I can," I said. "I would. I do." I felt my spine align. I felt the weight of decades settle into their proper places, not on my shoulders, but beneath my feet. "You thought you could turn me into a vacancy. Tonight, you learned that this home is not yours to price. You thought you could count my steps and my pills and my hours until I fit your math. Tonight, your math met my wife's foresight and my lawyer's pen. You thought I would beg. Tonight I do not beg. I instruct." He flailed for a new weapon. He grabbed the old letter again about downsizing and waved it like a flag in a battle he had already lost. "She wanted this," he said, desperate, voice cracking. She said we'd grow old together," I replied. "We didn't get that, so we get this. We get me growing old," as she asked, "with dignity, with boundaries, with memory, and with love if it returns to the house." Dawn turned to David then, and something final happened in her eyes. She saw him. Not the version she married, not the one he sold her, but the man in my living room holding a brochure like a lifeline, drowning in debt, angry at all the wrong things. "You told me we were a team," she said. "You told me Dad was the problem. You told me you were building a future for us." He tried to put his hand on her arm. She stepped back. "Dawn," he said, softer now, almost pleading. "Baby, listen." She shook her head. "No, you listen." She looked at me. "Dad, I'm sorry." The words were small. They were not enough, but they were a beginning. "I don't expect you to forgive me tonight. I don't deserve that. But I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." I did not smile. I did not rush to lift her out of what she felt. Some lessons require the sting to stay a while, so the skin knows how to grow back. "We'll see," I said. "We will see what your weeks look like, not your words." David scraped his chair back so hard the legs shrieked on the floor. He gathered his folder and the penthouse brochure and crammed them back into his bag. He pointed at me again, but the gesture had no point left. "You'll regret this," he said. The threat was hollow. The house did not flinch. "I'll call my lawyer. I'll call the bank. I'll call—" "Call them," Victoria said. "We'll be here." He stormed toward the door. At the threshold, he turned to Dawn. "Are you coming?" he asked. And the question was not about leaving the house. It was about choosing the gravity that would pull her. She looked at him for a long time. Long enough for the curtain to lift and fall once more. Long enough for me to hear Helen's clock tick 3 slow beats. "No," she said. Just that. He left. The screen door slapped, then rattled, then settled. His steps thudded down the porch. A car door opened, closed, the engine turned, and then the sound moved down the street until it was a far thing, not a present one. No one spoke for a while. The late light had turned gold and climbed the walls. Dust drifted like quiet snow. I poured water into glasses. My hand remained steady. I took a long drink and felt it move through me. Mrs. Gray exhaled a soft, "Thank God," into her palms. Hank put his hat back on and took it off again, embarrassed by his own relief. Victoria gathered the papers into a tidy stack like a coda to a song. I looked at Dawn. Tears had made clean tracks on her cheeks. She wiped them with the heel of her hand and looked small, then taller, then small again, like someone trying to find the right size. "Dad," she said, "what happens now?" "Now," I said, "we breathe." I nodded at Victoria. She passed me one last page. I signed it where the sticky flag asked me to. The pen made a sound like a tiny door closing or opening, depending on where you stand. This document was simple. It appointed a successor trustee if I ever chose to step back. It is named Conditions, not Threats. It lay out a calm road. I folded it and placed it with Helen's letter. "Now," I said, We clean. We put the knitting basket where it belongs. We take the dumpster off the list of words used in this house. We make soup, drink coffee, and fix the screen door because it rattles when the wind hits it. We do small things. The big thing has already happened." She nodded, tears again, but softer ones, human ones. She rose and moved to Helen's photo. She touched the frame with 2 fingers. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered. She didn't expect an answer. She didn't need one. The apology was not a key that opened anything yet. It was a hand placed on a door that might one day swing. I walked Mrs. Gray and Hank to the door and hugged them each. "Thank you," I said, and meant it like a prayer. They took their leave, stepping down into a street that looked the same as it had that morning, and not at all the same. The house grew quieter, but not empty. Victoria finished packing her folder. She looked at me over the rim of her glasses. "You did well," she said. "You were clear. You were kind enough, and not a drop more." "Thank you," I said. She nodded at Dawn, offered her a card with her personal number, then slipped out to her car. For a few minutes, the only sound was the clock. It did not feel like a countdown anymore. It felt like a measure. I sat again. Dawn sat across from me. The files formed a small fortress between us, not a wall, but a reminder of what words can't hold alone. I looked at her, and I thought of the boy I used to be, and the man I had been, and the man I was in this exact moment. I thought of Helen. I thought of the nights I nearly called to say I would agree to anything if it meant the voices would stop. I thought of beans and rice and canceled trips and laughter on the stairs. I thought of respect. It is a small word. It is a big bridge. "Dawn," I said, "I don't know what tomorrow looks like, but I know what tonight is. Tonight is the end of pretending. Tomorrow can be the first day of repair if you choose it. Repair isn't free. It costs time. It costs pride. It costs habits we think are part of us but are only blankets we learn to carry. Can you pay that price?" "Yes," she said. "Not I'll try." "Not maybe? Just yes." It was a word with no music, which made it better. I stood, gathered the glasses, and took them to the sink. I washed them slow, not because they were dirty, but because the sound of water can stitch the edges of a day. I dried them and put them away. I closed the files and placed them in the drawer where Helen kept recipes. I touched the letter one more time, and then I spoke to the air, to the photograph, to the part of me that still needed to say it out loud. "Helen," I said, "they thought I was weak. They thought I was finished. But now they have seen the cost. Now they have seen the consequence." The house did not answer. It didn't have to. I already knew. I turned back to Dawn and saw her standing by the bookshelf, looking at the family albums. She pulled one down and opened it to a page where she is 6 and the dog is stealing her sandwich. She smiled a little and then closed the book. She put it back exactly in its place. That small precision hurt me and healed me at once. Outside, a car door somewhere down the block slammed, and then silence slid over the neighborhood like a clean sheet. I turned off the living room lamp, leaving only the soft porch light. The room glowed like a memory that decided to stay. I walked on to the guest room. "You can sleep here," I said, "under one condition. We don't talk about forgiveness in the morning. We talk about groceries. Forgiveness is not a breakfast food." She almost laughed. Almost. "Okay," she said, and for the first time in months, I heard my daughter's voice without an echo. I went back to the living room. I took the eviction notice and placed it by the door where I would see it in the morning. Not as a trophy. As a reminder that defense is not cruelty. It is dignity with a spine. I checked the locks. I turned the deadbolt. I stood with my hand on the cool metal for a few extra heartbeats and then let it go. There is a particular tiredness that comes after a battle. It is not the tiredness of yard work or a long drive. It is the tired of muscles you didn't know you had, the ones that hold your name up when someone tries to write over it. I sank into the chair and closed my eyes. I felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because I had finally put the weight down that was never mine to carry. Heavier because truth weighs more than lies. But it is a good weight. It keeps you from blowing away. If you're listening and you've ever been told you don't matter, that your years count less than someone's plans, that your home is just a number on a spreadsheet, then I want to speak to you directly. Feeling unseen is hard, isn't it? Feeling used is heavy. If you believe every person deserves respect, deserves to be heard in their own home, comment one word: justice. Now watch what they do to change that. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment 3 below to let me know you're here with me. I woke up the morning after the storm and realized the house felt different. The air was lighter, the walls didn't press in the way they used to, and I didn't walk through the kitchen expecting another ambush. The papers had been signed, the eviction notice had been delivered, and the trust was secured. It wasn't just a legal victory, it was the closing of a long and painful chapter. The silence that once cut me now felt like peace. For the first time in years, I sat at the table with a cup of coffee and felt no fear that someone would come and demand I surrender what was mine. The weeks that followed moved quickly, full of calls with Victoria, filings with the county clerk, and a steady stream of envelopes that carried the weight of completion. The building was officially transferred into the Protective Trust, the accounts were reorganized, and the house, this house, was marked on every record as untouchable. I did not sell it, I did not vacate it, I fortified it. By the time the 30 days ran out, David was gone, vanished under the pressure of debts he could no longer juggle. Neighbors said they saw him loading a U-Haul with boxes in the dark. Word came later that the casinos had filed suit. His empire of bluff collapsed in a single season. Dawn stayed behind a while longer, sleeping in the guest room, avoiding long conversations. She wanted forgiveness quickly. But I knew forgiveness is not a switch. It is a season, and she would have to walk through it step by step. One afternoon she stood in the doorway of the garden, holding Helen's old watering can. "Dad," she said, "let me help." I nodded, not because I trusted her yet, but because labor is one way people begin to return to themselves. Together we trimmed the roses Helen loved, the ones she had planted 30 years earlier. The garden had gone wild, choked by weeds and neglect, but with time and care, it began to look like itself again. Every bloom felt like a small promise kept. It reminded me that peace does not come from winning one large war. It comes from tending patiently the ground beneath your feet. The house no longer felt like a battlefield. It began to feel like home again. I moved Helen's chair back to the sunny corner, polished the wood of the banister, and put the family photographs in new frames. I joined the community center 2 blocks away and signed up for the woodworking club. For years, I had dreamed of opening a small workshop, but I always pushed the dream aside to pay for tuition, cars, and weddings. Now I found myself sanding old oak, carving small boxes, and teaching a few of the younger men how to use tools safely. The sawdust smelled like freedom. The shavings curled onto the floor like tiny golden ribbons. My hands remembered more than I thought they would. My heart felt younger with every stroke. People noticed the change. Mrs. Gray came by with fresh bread and said, "Martin, you look taller." Hank laughed during a card game and told me, "You're playing sharper than you ever did." The truth was simple. I was no longer bent under the weight of betrayal. I had set it down. And once it was gone, I had space to pick up life again. Dawn tried to repair the bridge. She sent texts, brought groceries, and even wrote a letter apologizing for letting greed blind her. The words were careful, but still heavy with shame. One evening, she placed it on the kitchen table and whispered, "I'm sorry, Dad. I'll do whatever it takes to prove I can change." I read the letter. I folded it. I placed it in a drawer, not to keep as a treasure, but as a marker of her journey. I did not respond directly. I knew that my peace could not depend on her remorse. My healing had to come from within. So I let the words sit unreturned and chose to live without waiting for another apology. "I don't need their words," I told Helen's photograph. "I have my life." David, on the other hand, disappeared into the shadows of his own making. Rumors said he rented a small one-bedroom apartment above a pawn shop, that his car had been repossessed, and that the debts followed him from one town to the next. I didn't chase the details. I didn't need to. The important part was that his hunger no longer fed on me. He tried once to send a message through Dawn, asking me to hear him out, to let him explain. I shook my head. "No," I said simply. "Some doors stay closed." I didn't slam it in anger. I closed it with finality, like one shuts off a light at the end of the day. It was not revenge. It was a boundary. In the quiet that followed, I began to give. I remembered the nights when I thought I was the only old man in the world being pushed out by his own children. But the more I listened at the community center, the more I heard stories like mine. Fathers forgotten, mothers abandoned, grandparents treated as burdens instead of blessings. So I took a portion of the trust income and started a small fund. We used it to help cover heating bills for seniors in winter, to provide rides to medical appointments, and to make sure no one was forced out of their home by those who should have been their protectors. The letters that came back were full of shaky handwriting and raw gratitude. "You reminded me I'm not invisible," one woman wrote. "You gave me dignity back," said another. Each envelope felt like another weed pulled from my soul. I realized the pain I had carried was not wasted. It had been compost, rich soil to grow something good. There was one afternoon in particular that stays with me. I was sitting in the garden, watching the light shift over the roses, when Serenity, my granddaughter, ran up the path. She was small, hair flying, eyes full of laughter. She jumped into my lap and wrapped her arms around my neck. "Grandpa," she said, "tell me the story of the brave grandpa again." I laughed deep and free. "Yes, my love," I said, "happily ever after." And in that moment, I knew I had written a new story for her to inherit, not one of betrayal, but one of resilience. The lessons came clear in the quiet hours. For parents, I learned this. Love must have boundaries. Loving your children does not mean handing them the keys to your soul. It means guiding them with both tenderness and firmness, teaching them gratitude as much as ambition. For children, the lesson is sharper. Greed eats more than money. It devours trust, family, and self-respect. A grateful child can build a legacy. A selfish one destroys it, and for the world at large, in this modern age where screens and numbers often matter more than faces, I discovered that character remains the only asset no one can steal. Wealth shifts, houses crumble, accounts empty. But truth and dignity stand when everything else falls. One morning, while walking through the park near the community center, I sat on a bench to rest. A little boy with freckles ran up, holding a dandelion gone to seed. He grinned, placed it in my hand, and ran back to his mother without a word. I looked at that fragile globe, hundreds of tiny seeds waiting to scatter. I blew gently, and they lifted into the air, small white parachutes, floating wherever the wind would carry them. I smiled. The world, despite its cruelty, still had kindness left. Strangers still carried light. That little gift, as simple as it was, told me I had chosen right when I stepped out of the cage of betrayal into a wider, kinder world. Now my days are slower but richer. I cook simple meals, I share evenings with friends at the center, and I write letters to people who reach out after hearing my story. I sit with serenity and teach her how to carve wood, her tiny hands clumsy but eager. I walk past Helen's roses and whisper her name, knowing she hears in some way that matters. And when the phone buzzes with unknown numbers, I let it ring. Peace is not answering every knock. Peace is choosing which doors stay open. As for Dawn, she continues to try. Some days she joins me in the garden. Other days she calls just to tell me she made soup the way her mother did. I let her in, slowly, cautiously. I do not forget, but I do allow space for her to become who she once was. Forgiveness is not erasure. It is a path. She must walk it, not me. My path now is different. It leads toward rest, toward service, toward legacy. I end this chapter with one truth etched deeper than any signature. I don't need them anymore. I have myself. I have dignity, peace, and the steady rhythm of days lived honestly. Betrayal cut me, but it also carved out the room I needed to plant something better. I finally see where I belong, and every sunrise is proof I made the right choice. If you're listening, I want to ask you something. What lesson from this story speaks to you most? Parents setting boundaries, children learning gratitude, or the truth that character outlives money? Comment on the lesson that struck you so we can carry it together into the world. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.